everyone, welcome back to Fig and Thistle Books. My name is Amanda and I'm here to talk about Changeling by Victor LaValle. I read it for Russell over at Ink and Paper blog has had a Round the World in 1,000 Pages challenge, so I read it for that. I enjoyed the book very much. I initially thought I would give it 5 stars, and 5 stars for me is like definite reread, recommend this to everyone. But I thought about it a couple hours after I read the book, and it's a 4-star read, which is still a really great read. It's a really great book, but I don't know if I'll reread it. I know I will definitely try to check out other books by Victor LaValle. So I'm going to structure this video and talk about spoiler-free stuff, and then I'll give you a heads up when I'm about to get spoilery so you can scoot and go read this book before you come back and finish the video. Alright, so The Changeling by Victor LaValle follows a man named Apollo. The book starts when Apollo is a young boy. It actually starts talking about how his parents met and fell in love, and then Apollo was born, and it seems like a very loving family, but at some point the father leaves the picture. And we're really unclear as we read the book what exactly happened to Apollo's father. You know, did he die? Did he abandon them? Did the mom like kidnap the kid and run away? We're not really sure. We just know that the father is not there and that Apollo has a reoccurring dream about his father coming to get him. He also receives at one point a box of his father's belongings outside of a door. So he's trying to piece together kind of like, who am I? Where is my father? Why is my mom, his mom, Lillian, is one of my favorite characters in this book. She's freaking amazing. You know, what is my mom telling me or not telling me? So we've got all these, he's got all these questions and this absence of a father growing up. And then the book shifts and we meet Apollo as a grown man, and he is a rare book finder. He goes and finds rare books and kind of almost like a picker, going through boxes and basements and book sales and yard sales or whatever, and then selling them. So that's his profession. He meets a woman named Emma. She's a librarian, and they fall in love. They're friends for a while. They fall in love. They get married. They have a baby together. And what I think is one of the most beautifully written birth scenes ever. And they seem to be having, you know, the usual kind of issues that a couple with a newborn baby has. Sleeplessness, financial worries, feeling disconnected from one another. And it was a woman feeling kind of disconnected from who I used to be or how my life is now. This is not a spoiler, but you get the sense that there's some postpartum depression, some marital stress. It is very seeped in realism. The first half of this book feels very much like a realistic novel. In fact, I've decided to put this here now. This, I don't believe, is a spoiler. I would keep it intentionally vague. I almost quit reading this book. I was about halfway through the book, and I was like, I'm engaged in the plot. I love the characters. The writing is gorgeous, and I'm pissed. And I will talk about more that. I'll talk about that more. I'm getting stuttery because I'm trying very hard not to spoil the book. I will talk that more in the second half of why I almost stopped, because the realism was almost a bit too much. But the things came together, and I'm really glad LaValle took the path that he took in writing this book. And I'll talk about that in the second half of the video. But if you are reading the book and the realism feels a bit too real, I think if you stick with it, you'll be pleasantly surprised. So, and I'm saying that as someone with a trauma who doesn't like violence. So, there was a point where I was like, I don't know that I'm going to finish this book. And I did, and I'm glad that I did. Okay, that was a little tangent. So, because things seem to be so rough with the baby being born, and they love the baby, Emma and Paulo love this baby, something happens to the baby that is quite bad, and Emma disappears right after this event, horrific event. And that was, that was the point where it was like, I don't know if I could, it was a difficult scene to read. But I did it, and I'm glad I did. So Emma disappears. Apollo decides to go find Emma. He's going to find where she is and figure out why things have turned out the way they have, and what has happened to what seemed like a very loving and complete family. Apollo was very happy. Stress, new parent stress, but he loved his baby, he loved his wife. He's this entire experience feels very unreal to him. So he goes on this journey. He meets some people along the way, and he goes to figure out what happened to his family, and not just what happened to Emma and his baby, but who he is and what happened to his family when he was growing up is kind of running in the background of this. So that was the spoiler-free, which was very hard to do because I want to talk about all the spoilery bits. So I'm going to sip my coffee and give y'all a chance to skedaddle, and then we will resume. All right, let's get spoilery. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about how you would classify this book before I get into themes and then some of my issues and and pointing out what I really enjoyed about the book. This book has been classified as horror, and I get where there are some horror elements. I think this was mismanaged marketing. This book is not horror. It is straight up magical realism. It very much reminded me of several magical realistic writers. Angela Carter, Helen Oyeyemi, Katharine Dunn, and a fair amount of Gothic, I would say, is infused through this. Like, it had a Shirley Jackson feel. If you've ever read her kind of unsettling short stories or novels that tends to have, is it paranormal? Is it not? We don't know. Like The Haunting of Hill House or something, where you're not quite sure if your narrator is reliable, if what you are seeing is actually happening, or if there's like mental illness or paranormal activity or something where you are not getting the full picture. So I think this was very, the way the book is divided up, it's like the first half is steeped in realism. Emma and Apollo's relationship is so like early marriage, having a baby, growing up, going to work, friends. It's so steeped in like realism. And then there's a very definite switch after the death of baby Brian. And we're in the spoilery part, so I can say that. And then it goes full throttle magical realism. And from reading comments and listening to Russell's review, it seems like some people had difficulty making that jump. I did not. And I think it's because magical realism is one of my favorite genres or types of writing. I read a lot of Angela Carter, a lot of Angela Carter. I'm reading Angela Carter right now. And I think that sort of, if you've read Geek Love by Katharine Dunn, that's another book where it feels very realistic. We have very real people-like characters. And then there's this element of like the fantastical. Like, how did he make these carnival type creatures? Like, it doesn't, when you try to break it down into logic, this could never really happen. This is not logical, but it feels logical. And this just, it's that tug of the uncanny. It's this feels like reality. It looks like reality, and it is very unreal and very magical. And I love the unsettling nature of magical realism. To me, that's the best kind of magical realism, is the unsettling kind. And that's if you read Angela Carter, if you read Katharine Dunn, if you read, who else? Helen Oyeyemi. You get like White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. Very seemed realistic. There's some things where you're like, oh, it seems kind of odd, and then you reach a turn and you're like, okay, this is weird. House of Leaves is another one where it's, I guess that's classified as horror. I don't know. We'll have to see. I really think horror is not. If you are a horror fanatic and you go into this book, you might be disappointed. This book is magical realism. This book is also fairy tales and folklore. So I did my undergraduate thesis on fairy tales, and I wrote some really bad poems about fairy tales, but I had to do a fair amount of research. So fairy tale retellings, folklore is something that I just gravitate to. And the pattern of the book follows very much a pattern of classic folklore. You have normal people. You have an everyday life. You have maybe some elements of magic that are like casually introduced. Like, I met a witch in Brazil and I made a wish and I have a string around my, which is what Emma does. And then you reach this turn and something fantastical happens and everyone's like, oh, hey, it's a fantastical magical thing. And they're not really like, this isn't really happening. This isn't real. And so it very much followed sort of a pattern of a fairy tale or folklore in the writing, in the style, in the build. There's even a discussion in the book where one of the characters talks about how fairy tales are written and the structure and their purpose. So I feel like it just clicked with me. But I think it is that combination of reading a lot of magical realism and studying fairy tales and folklore. It felt natural to me. So I think classifying this book as magical realism would give people a better indication of what they're walking into instead of straight up horror. Okay. Also, did anyone else note the shout out to Shirley Jackson in there? Anyone? The boat, Mary Cat. Mary Cat is one of my favorite characters from We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I've read that book numerous times. You should read it, but I squealed when I read that. So I was quite happy. Thank you, Victor LaValle, for shouting out one of my favorite women authors ever. Okay, sustenance. Okay, so we've talked about language. We've talked about kind of writing. The writing is gorgeous. We've talked about how to classify this. Let's talk about some themes. So in addition to fairy tales and folklore, in that there is a lot of, the Changeling, that's a fairy tale. There's the Rapunzel's in there. There's some Nordic fairy tales woven in there. There's nods to other cultures and their fairy tales thrown in there. It also talks about the, I think, fairy tales and the mythology we make for ourselves. There's talk about how a glamour is used to make something that is not a baby look like a baby. When a changeling, a baby is basically kidnapped and left in its place is not the baby. But it looks like the baby. It has a glamour on it. And I feel like there were allusions in the book to how Brian, not baby Brian, but Apollo's dad, is remembered in a way that was not real. Apollo is taking a traumatic memory and he's recasting it in his mind and putting a glamour on it. People want to believe what they want to believe, and people will interpret the things they see as their reality. So that's sort of putting that glamour on it. Another key example of this is the douchebag men who, here comes my cat. He really wants to be on YouTube. Stop, you're going to knock it over. The douchebag men who are going after the women on Cal's Island, especially Greta's husband, and our super evil guy, William Wheeler. His interpretation of his relationship with his wife was she didn't understand. I had to sacrifice my daughter. I was doing it for the family. He has taken this bad, traumatic thing that he did to someone else, and he has recast it, and he has repackaged it, and that has become his reality. He doesn't seem to see what is really there. So I feel like there's instances where we can see that the sort of themes play out, not just in a fantastical way, like actual changelings, actual fairy tales, but in the fairy tales and the folklore we create for ourselves. And this can also be attributed to like what makes a good parent, what makes a happy family, what have we decided is the happy fairy tale ending, which this book also discusses doesn't exist. You know, happy endings in fairy tales is not a thing. So I feel like this was a very good way to have a great story with compelling characters and talk about these things in real life that may be a bit too big or unwieldy. Having said that, I did want to talk about why I almost quit reading the book in more detail. And this can kind of figure into some issues I had with, I think, the novel's structure. So in the first half of the book, it looks like Emma has postpartum psychosis. And I know there's been some discussion of how could someone actually think that their baby is a changeling? What if it was a mistake? What if if you have postpartum psychosis, it's a psychosis. You could really think that your baby is a changeling. There have been mothers who have really thought that their children were possessed by the devil. There have been mothers who thought they were going to get their kids to heaven and keep them safe. It is a severe mental illness. Not as pervasive as typical postpartum depression, or I would say not psychotic postpartum depression. And I don't know if I'm using the right clinical terms. But postpartum depression is something that many, many women experience. So when I was reading the first half of the book, I was having issues with that this is a male writer. We are hearing things and seeing things mostly through Apollo's eyes. And I was worried that this was going to be a book where it's just a crazy mom who's killed a baby. And then when he gets to the island with all the witches and that buildup where he's realizing there's this group of women and there's other women who are doing this, I'm like, please don't let this be, okay, it's not mental illness or a mentally ill mom who's done something terrible. It's just women and their witchy magic are bad. And I was getting quite salty as I read this. And I was like, I stopped. And I looked up Victor LaValle, and I saw that he has a family with, he has some family members who do have schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and that he has written about mental illness before. So I felt a bit like I can finish this book, but I really didn't want to read another book where the issue is either, oh, mental illness, people do crazy things, or, oh, women, you know how they are. So I actually joined the second half of the book. And I actually told my book club, I said, okay, so here's my thing. If this book keeps going straight realism, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to hate it. If this book gets some real magical realism going in it, I think he can turn it around. And he did. So, but that was my issue. And that kind of, if I had to pick, and one of the reasons why I knocked it from 5 stars to 4 stars, is the characterization of Emma and Lillian and the other women. There are some intriguing women in this book, and we get to see snippets of their actions, thoughts, and feelings. But really, we are getting the novel through the eyes of Apollo and what he sees and what he experiences. I think it would have been slightly more effective to have Apollo and Emma be equal in the book. So maybe divide up chapters and have them from different perspectives or something. I would have liked to hear more from Emma. Lillian was fascinating. I would have liked more from her. I felt that would have balanced a bit better. I also feel like at the end of the book, I'm enjoying it. I'm invested. I'm in it. Apollo saves Emma. And Emma has all this like imbued like witchy power, and she's exhausted and she's tired, but she has been like out there for months and months protecting her child, manipulating and haunting a really, scummy man who's helping the big bad guy in this book. And Apollo shows up and it's like, well, now I don't feel like I have to do this anymore because I'm not alone. And then Apollo's the one who like strategizes how to get away or what to do, or we'll do this. And I want the mama to save everyone. I do. There are powerful women characters in here. There's a lot of discussion about female solidarity and female empowerment, but at the end of the day, Apollo had to show up to get the job done. And I get that that is probably a very typical flow for fairy tales, but seeing as we only get Apollo really telling us what's going on, and Emma is a significant character in here. She needs more. She needs more voice. She needs to keep that empowerment. And another weird thing I'm going to talk about, and I hate it. I hate it when books do this. This is the ding number. Okay. So my dings on the book, which is still a great book, was the narrative structure. So balancing Emma and Apollo's point of view. The Emma and Apollo's relationship with Apollo kind of over, he comes and saves the day. Okay, and this kind of fits in with that. So there's a scene where he finally finds Emma. They go to the cave. They go back to this Jorg's house. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. The dude who is now dead on the kitchen floor. And she's exhausted, which makes total sense. And he gives her a bath, and she's disgusting. Her clothing is basically like just adhered to her. He gives her a bath. He washes her. He lays her in the bed. So of course they have sex. And in the book it actually says they fucked. That's the sentence. And I was just kind of like, I would want to take a nap. Like, that was not, and that's not magical realism. That is a time where we need some realism. And there is no boner killer like, I wonder if a troll's eating our kid. I mean, it just made no sense. I could see them like talking. I could see them like kissing or cuddling, but like, and he's still smelling like alcohol, and there's a dead dude in the kitchen, but that just felt weird. Maybe I'm just super vanilla, but I was like, and it's a small scene, but it was enough for me to go. Like, I laughed out. I was like, what the hell? Like, that is so not the thing I would think about doing at that point in time. So, okay, that's a tiny thing. But overall, great book. I also think the book talks a lot about male violence. There's some allusions to, trolls, both internet trolls and actual trolls. There's discussions on, I could hear when William and his, gang of, angry creature men or whatever, it was like men's rights activists on Twitter, the crap they're saying. And the tactics he used against Greta very much mirror the tactics actual abusers use against women and others who are abused. The gaslighting, the being charming and acting like you want someone back, the revengefulness, the stealing money, just the cruelty, and then playing the victim. That is very, I thought, a realistic element portrayed in a fantastical way that really worked for me. There's female solidarity, there's discussions of technology and how that's maybe changed how we interact or how we view our families. So at the end of the day, I thought this book was superb. It was a great read. It was fast. It was well plotted. I did want to say in Russell's video, and of course I could type this out in the comments, and I will. He talks about not understanding why Emma hits Apollo with a hammer and has him chained up. And I think she did that so that he could in no way be implicated in what happened to the baby. Because if she had killed the baby and just left, he would have been blamed for it. So I don't know how she did. I do think there's, as magical realism, I do think she had some like witchy, amazing powers. Somehow got him chained up, and knocked him in the head with a hammer. But I do think she loves Apollo, and that was her way of making sure that he is not. She knows that he can't see this changeling, and that's her way of making sure that he is not implicated in this murder or not. So, okay, this is kind of rambling, but I was very excited to talk about this. I thought it was a great book. Lots of great themes. If you love magical realism, you'll like this book. If you like Helen Oyeyemi, if you like geek love, if you like Angela Carter, you're gonna love this book. Just, if I had to change anything, give the women a little more voice, and we don't always need to be rescued. Mama bears are quite powerful. All right, thanks, guys.